Hello everyone, welcome back. So we will begin this session. So the topics which will be covered in this session would be umbilical cord, amniotic fluid. Then we will be talking about assessment of amniotic fluid, and we will be talking about disorders of amniotic fluid like oligohydramnios and polyhydramnios. Then we will talk about fetal physiology. Okay, so let's begin this session. Okay, so the topic is umbilical cord, small, short, sweet topic. The origin of umbilical cord is extra embryonic mesoderm. Okay, it comes from extra embryonic mesoderm. It is that connecting stalk between the embryonic disc and the placenta. And then you write down length of umbilical cord is 55 centimeter. The range being 30 to 100. If it is less than 30 centimeter, it is called short umbilical cord. Which is associated with abruptio placenta. Okay, short umbilical cord associated with abruptio placenta. Then more than 100 centimeter is called as long umbilical cord. Yeah, long umbilical cord. It is associated with cord prolapse, cord around neck, and true knot. There is something called true knot. Have a look at this slide. Yeah, what you can see over here is a baby delivered out, and the cord is having a true knot. Yeah, this true knot is seen when the cord is more than 100 centimeter, as compared to this knot over here, which is not a true knot. There is a false knot. False knot. True knot is dangerous. True knot can cause intrauterine fetal death. But thankfully there is a jelly called Wharton's jelly. Wharton's jelly gives cushion effect. So true knot can cause IFD. Nobody can deny that. But Wharton's jelly gives cushioning effect, and that is why baby gets the protection. False knot, on the other hand, is due to excessive collection of Wharton's jelly at some place. Excessive collection of Wharton's jelly at some place, or it could also be due to umbilical venous varices. Yeah, so we were talking about the length of umbilical cord, and you have understood that the length of umbilical cord should be in the normal range. More than 100 cc, 100 centimeter is long umbilical cord, can be associated with cord prolapse, cord around neck, and true knot. Yeah, diameter of umbilical cord 1.5 centimeter. Diameter of umbilical cord 1.5 centimeter. Then covering epithelium of cord. Is called amnion. Covering epithelium is amnion, that shiny glistening layer which is originating from ectoderm. Yeah, origin of amnion is ectodermal. Yeah, below the amnion there is Wharton's jelly, which is, as I told you, which is actually obliterated extra embryonic mesoderm. Yeah, Wharton's jelly is below amnion. Okay, now below that you will find there would be 2 arteries and 1 big vein. Yeah, two arteries plus 1 vein. And I told you in the chapter called placenta, then there can be Hertel's anastomosis. Which are anastomosis between 2 arteries to maintain the pressure. Okay, Wharton's jelly and then 2 arteries and 1 vein, and Hertel's anastomosis. Then sometimes there can be only a single umbilical artery, only one umbilical artery, other umbilical artery is missing. So in the cord, instead of 3 vessels, there would be only 2 vessels, 1 vein, 1 artery, single umbilical artery condition. It looks like this. Yeah, so there is artery and there is vein, 1 artery is missing. Single umbilical artery is most common vascular abnormality in fetus. Most common vascular abnormality in fetus, single umbilical artery. Yeah, guys, it is most common vascular abnormality. It can be associated, it can be seen with cardiovascular anomaly, CVS anomaly in fetus. It can be seen with genitourinary anomalies. Yeah, CVS anomaly would be most common, genitourinary anomalies, then esophageal atresia. So GI abnormalities are also associated. Then trisomy 18 more than trisomy 21. Okay, it is associated with both trisomies, but 18 more than 21. Yeah, cases of 18 would have high chance of single umbilical artery. All right, now single umbilical artery can be diagnosed by Doppler. So USG Doppler can detect single umbilical artery. Yeah, so 2 vessel cord will be there and Doppler can pick up this condition. Yeah, if Doppler has picked up single umbilical artery and there is no congenital anomaly seen, so grossly baby is normal, there is no other congenital anomaly, we don't have to do anything, we just have to do wait and watch policy. Do nothing if there is only single umbilical artery. Isolated single umbilical artery condition does not require any intervention. Okay, but if there is single umbilical artery plus any evidence of congenital anomaly, single umbilical artery plus any evidence of congenital anomaly, you are supposed to do amniocentesis. Yeah, you would do amniocentesis. You will take out some fluid, amniotic fluid, and send for karyotype to rule out trisomies. Whether there is Edwards syndrome, that's trisomy 18, or Down syndrome, that's trisomy 21, will be understood. Because there is congenital anomaly, I proceeded and I did amniocentesis. Okay, got it? So single umbilical artery with congenital anomaly, do amniocentesis. Okay, so 2 clinical cases. One is without any abnormality, only single umbilical artery isolated finding, and another is single umbilical artery plus congenital anomaly. Okay, so these 2 clinical cases can be given to you and you will have to right, the correct management of these patients. Okay, all right guys, that is all about it. Then we will talk about the next topic called as amniotic fluid. Amniotic fluid. Amniotic fluid, remember, most important source of amniotic fluid is fetal urine. So most important source is fetal urine. Okay, but remember, if they ask you trimester wise, most important source up to 12 weeks of gestation would not be urine. It would be maternal plasma transudate. Maternal plasma transudate. Then 12 to 20 weeks would be fetal skin. Yeah, skin is non-keratinized. Yeah, keratinization happens roughly at 22 to 25 weeks, and after that skin will not be the source of amniotic fluid. But before that, when the skin is non-keratinized, skin is very porous. It is allowing the fluid to come out. So transudation happens from the skin, and that forms the amniotic fluid. Am I clear about this? Yeah, guys. After 20 weeks would be fetal urine. After 20 weeks would be fetal urine. But if you get a blanket question, most important source, your answer should be fetal urine. Am I clear about this? Yeah, guys, urine is most important source in second half of pregnancy. Second most important source. Second most important source in second half of pregnancy would be fetal lungs. Yes, lungs will provide the fluid. Yeah, fetal lungs would be second most important source. Now you understood sources, but what about drainage? Most important drainage is by swallowing, and swallowing begins from 10 to 12 weeks. Yeah, swallowing begins from 10 to 12 weeks. That is the most important drainage. So baby will swallow back the fluid. Fetal swallowing will maintain the balance of amniotic fluid level in the amniotic sac. Yeah, guys, second most important drainage would be intramembranous transfer. I said second most important drainage would be intramembranous transfer. Let me show you the slide of the balance of amniotic fluid in amniotic sac. So here is the fetal compartment, and here is amniotic sac. So urine is the most important source of amniotic fluid, 800 to 1000. Yeah, so actually speaking, the figure is 600 to 1000. I'll write again, 600 to 1000 I'll write. Okay, yeah, that is the most important source. Second most important source would be lungs. Lungs will provide amniotic fluid. Okay, yeah, swallowing will be the drainage mechanism. Yeah, swallowing will drain it. Intramembranous transfer will drain it. So swallowing is most important drainage mechanism. Yeah, guys, girls, if there is a fault in swallowing mechanism, there will be polyhydramnios. If there is a fault in urine formation, there will be oligohydramnios. This is as simple as that. Yeah, so this is about the formation and the drainage of amniotic fluid. Amniotic fluid balance is very important. Oligohydramnios would be less amniotic fluid, and polyhydramnios would be more amniotic fluid. And amniotic fluid is actually a mirror of something abnormal, if amniotic fluid is abnormal, then something is abnormal. It's a mirror of fetal health, by the way. Yeah. So let us talk about few more facts about amniotic fluid. Physical features. pH is alkaline, 7 to 7.5. Yeah. So litmus paper turns blue. So litmus paper will turn blue. Red litmus paper will become blue. Nitrazine paper, which is actually yellow in color, will also turn blue. So litmus paper and nitrazine paper will tell us that alkaline medium is there. Vaginal pH is acidic, but amniotic fluid is alkaline. So if any patient comes to your clinic and says, "Doctor, I am having leaking per vaginum," you put a litmus paper, red color litmus paper. If there is vaginal fluid, there will be acidic pH. It will remain red. But if there is amniotic fluid, it will become blue. Word of caution: blood is also alkaline, so blood may give false positive report. Yeah. So blood may also change the color to blue. So mark my words, litmus paper turns blue. It is used in diagnosis of PROM, used in diagnosis of premature rupture of membranes. Okay. So patient will come with leaking per vaginum and you will diagnose it with litmus paper or nitrazine paper based on the principle that amniotic fluid is alkaline. Specific gravity is 1.01. It is same as that of urine. Specific gravity 1.01. It is same as that of urine. Osmolarity is 260 milliosmoles per liter. It is a marker of renal maturity. It's a marker of renal maturity. Okay. Yeah. So yes, osmolarity 260 will tell us that fetus is mature, kidneys are mature. Volume. Let's talk about volume of amniotic fluid. At 12 weeks, it is 50 ml. At 20 weeks, it is 400 ml. At 32 weeks, it is 1 liter. This is considered as maximum. Yeah. At 40 weeks, it is 800 ml. Yeah. Why it has reduced? Why amniotic fluid levels have gone down? Because of something called as placental aging. So placenta is now becoming aged, calcified. So placental aging will reduce the amount of amniotic fluid. Okay, got it? What will happen after 42 weeks? It would be 200 ml or less. So post-term pregnancy has oligohydramnios. Post-term pregnancy has oligohydramnios. All right. Yeah. So these are the physical features. I said pH alkaline, 7 to 7.5. Specific gravity 1.01. Osmolarity 260. And volumes, different volumes at different weeks of gestation. Remember, maximum is at 32 weeks. Yeah. So early third trimester is the time and it will be maximum. Remember, 12 weeks is just 50 ml. So there is a procedure called amniocentesis, which should never be done in first trimester. So I'll write here amniocentesis is contraindicated in first trimester. Why? Because fluid is very less. If fluid is less and you are removing fluid, then there will be complications to fetus. Yeah. So yes, remember, amnio should not be done in first trimester. All right. After physical features, let's talk about one more physical feature, by the way, color of amniotic fluid. So in colors, early pregnancy is colorless. yeah, because it is water, predominantly water, so it is colorless. But near term, because of presence of lanugo and epidermal cells, it becomes straw color, which is actually pale yellow. So both the things are considered normal. Early pregnancy, normal is colorless, and near term it is straw color due to lanugo and epidermal cells. Yeah. Then green color. Green is seen in condition where there is meconium stained amniotic fluid. Yeah, meconium stained amniotic fluid. It's a marker of fetal distress. Remember, whenever there is distress, that means hypoxia, that would lead to vagal nerve stimulation, that would lead to bradycardia and increased intestinal motility. See the sequence, distress, which means hypoxia. Hypoxia leads to vagal stimulation, and then bradycardia, and then increased intestinal motility. Increased intestinal motility will lead to passage of meconium. And meconium is green in color because of bile pigments. So green color amniotic fluid will tell us that the baby has distress. Yeah, there's something called greenish yellow as well, or saffron color. It is seen in greenish yellow or saffron color would be seen in post maturity. Meconium is generally passed in post-term pregnancies, so baby will be yellowish tinged because of meconium, and cord, placenta, everything will be yellowish in color. Greenish yellow would be the color, and this would be seen in post maturity. Okay, then is golden color. Golden color amniotic fluid is seen in conditions where there is hemolysis. There is hemolysis in the baby and in the baby's blood, which would be seen in conditions like Rh incompatibility, parvovirus, B19, cytomegalovirus. There will be hemolysis, and what will hemolysis do? Hemolysis will create unconjugated bilirubinemia. Unconjugated bilirubinemia, which is actually giving golden color. Yeah, unconjugated bilirubinemia. Then comes dark red amniotic fluid. Dark red amniotic fluid is seen in abruptio placenta. Dark red is seen in abruptio placenta. Accidental hemorrhage. Imagine a trauma to the abdomen, and that would lead to placental separation, and the blood will get accumulated. That would be dark red in color. It is seen in abruptio placenta. Then is dark brown. Dark brown is seen in fetal demise. Yeah, dark brown is seen in fetal demise. This is due to presence of old hemoglobin A. Yeah, it's also called tobacco juice appearance. So fetal demise. It can also be seen in missed abortion, which is actually early fetal demise. Yeah. So yes, missed abortion, IUFDs, they can give rise to dark brown amniotic fluid. Okay. This is all about colors of amniotic fluid. Guys, after colors of amniotic fluid, let us talk about the composition of amniotic fluid. Composition. 98 to 99% amniotic fluid is water. 98 is the best answer. Okay. 1 to 2% would be others. Yeah, 1 to 2% would be others, where there would be salts, then urine metabolites, then there would be nutrients, then there would be hormones. Salts, urine metabolites, nutrients and hormones. Salts would be sodium chloride, potassium chloride, yeah, and sodium chloride, potassium chloride. Because of these salts, there is one important question, that Ferning pattern is seen. So imagine a patient who has come to your clinic and she has leaking per vaginum. You take that fluid and see under microscope, you will see Ferning pattern. Yeah. In the due course of topics, we will talk about Ferning pattern. In fact, I will show you the picture of Ferning pattern as well. Just for time being, remember, Ferning pattern is seen in PROM due to salts in amniotic fluid. Then urine metabolites would be urea, creatinine, etc. Nutrients would be glucose, amino acids, then fats. Hormones would be prolactin, insulin. Yeah, there are prostaglandins also, but prostaglandins are not hormones. Prostaglandins are chemical, cytochemical. These are chemicals. Yeah, so hormones would be there: prolactin, insulin, sometimes renin. So these things would be there. Remember, even though nutrients are there, amniotic fluid has no nutritive function. Yeah, amniotic fluid has no nutritive function, not at all. It doesn't act as a source of nutrition. Placenta is doing the job wonderfully well. Yeah, it is providing all the nutrients for the growth of the baby. Amniotic fluid has nutrients, but it has no nutritive function. Okay, yeah. After you have written this, let's talk about functions of amniotic fluid. What are the functions of amniotic fluid? Number one, space for skeletal growth. Number two, shock absorption. Yeah, it provides a cushioning effect. It doesn't allow the uterine contraction wave to reach the umbilical cord. So shock absorption. So it prevents cord compression. Yeah. Number three, lung formation. Yeah, lung formation. Guys, remember, baby has breathing effort, that is chest wall movement, right from 11th week of gestation, and that would invite little bit of amniotic fluid inside the lungs, and lungs will now have alveolar development. Yeah, if there is no amniotic fluid, there will be no lung formation. No amniotic fluid, no lungs. Okay. Number four would be prostaglandins for labor. Yeah, amniotic fluid has prostaglandins for labor. Number five, lubrication during labor. If there is no amniotic fluid, believe me, there will be dry labor. There would be dry labor, lubrications would not be there. Remember, lubrication is so important to prevent injuries to the genital tract while delivery is happening. Yeah. So if there is no lubrication, dry labor will cause perineal tear, vaginal tears. Yeah, lubrication is important. Then after lubrication, then amniotic fluid is a diagnostic. It serves as a diagnostic test of fetal health. It's a mirror of fetal health, I told you. Yeah. If amniotic fluid is normal, I can say that the baby is normal. If amniotic fluid is reduced, then it could be reduced blood supply to the baby. Yeah, so it's a diagnostic test of fetal health. Amniotic fluid has diagnostic value as well. Okay, guys. So these are few important facts about amniotic fluid, which is what you have to remember. Now let's talk clinical. Let's talk about assessment of amniotic fluid. Yeah. Assessment of amniotic fluid. In assessment of amniotic fluid, write down investigation of choice is ultrasonography. USG. USG is best. It can tell me how much amniotic fluid is there. Remember, fluid, water, it is hypoechoic. In ultrasonography, water is hypoechoic. So imagine this is a uterus. Yeah. I will divide the uterus into 4 imaginary quadrants, and baby will be there in the uterus, floating in the amniotic fluid. I will measure the pockets of amniotic fluid in each quadrant. Yeah, so I'll take the biggest pocket and I will measure the vertical diameter of that pocket. Yeah. So in this case, let's say there is 2 centimeter, then 4 centimeter, then 2 centimeter, then 1 centimeter. Maximum vertical pocket, single deepest pocket, 2, 4, 2, 1. There's something called amniotic fluid index, AFI, amniotic fluid index. It is sum of all maximal vertical pockets or single deepest pockets of 4 quadrants. Yeah, single deepest pockets of 4 quadrants would be added together to give rise to a figure called amniotic fluid index. In this case, it will be 9 centimeter. Agreed? So AFI is 9 in this case. Is it normal? Yes, it is normal. How much is normal? Normal is more than 5 centimeter but less than 24 centimeter. Yeah, more than 5, less than or equal to 24 centimeter is considered as normal. There is another method of diagnosing normal abnormal, and it's called as single deepest pocket score. Single deepest pocket score. Single deepest pocket score. Now in the same case, 1, 2, 2, 4, which is the deepest pocket? The answer is 4 centimeter. So here the patient has single deepest pocket score of 4 centimeter. Is it normal? Yes, it is normal. Normal is considered as it is considered normal because it should be more than or equal to 2 centimeter, less than 8 centimeter. Then it is considered as normal. Single deepest pocket score is normal. Okay, this scoring system is the best scoring system. Yeah, see, when there is twin gestation, 2 babies are there, you cannot take AFI. Amniotic fluid index would be, what will be AFI of one baby, another baby's AFI? There will be confusion. So single deepest pocket score is great for multipedal gestation. In fact, nowadays we say AFI is not a good score, SDP is a good score. Yeah, clinical correlation of outcome of pregnancy is better with SDP score rather than with amniotic fluid index. Yeah, and just for your question point of view, there is one more score called AFV. It's called amniotic fluid volume. Amniotic fluid volume, AFV. It should be more than 200 ml, less than 2 liters. More than 200 ml, less than 2 liters is considered as normal amniotic fluid volume. Have a look at this picture. In this picture, you are seeing this is the outline of the baby over here. Yeah, this white color line you are seeing over here is outline of the baby, and you can see virtually no pockets of amniotic fluid around the baby. So this is oligohydramnios picture. Yeah, there are no pockets or less pockets of amniotic fluid as compared to this picture. Give me one second. Yeah, as compared to this picture, you are seeing baby. Yeah, there is outline of baby over here. Okay, and there is a black pocket over here. Black pocket over here. Yeah, so black pocket over here is there, and that black pocket is of amniotic fluid. So it's a huge pocket. Single deepest pocket would be definitely more than 8 centimeter over here. So this is polyhydramnios picture. Okay. Yeah. So let us now discuss about these disorders of amniotic fluid. That's a new topic. That's a topic, part of this topic itself. Disorders of amniotic fluid. And disorders of amniotic fluid, number 1, oligohydramnios. It is defined as less than 5 centimeter, less than 200 ml, less than 2 centimeter. What is this 5 centimeter? Amniotic fluid index. 200 ml, amniotic fluid volume. Less than 2 centimeter, single deepest pocket. And I told you, best scoring system nowadays is single deepest pocket score. Okay, oligohydramnios is that either this or this or this, but this is the best test, diagnostic test of oligohydramnios or polyhydramnios for that matter. Yeah. So guys, why will baby have oligohydramnios? What are the causes of oligohydramnios? Which is actually, I told you, urine. I mean, amniotic fluid is urine. If there is less urine, that means there is a possibility that baby might be getting less blood. So remember, in causes, number 1 I am writing uteroplacental insufficiency. What? Uteroplacental insufficiency, which means decreased blood flow to placenta. So the blood flow is hampered. That's why baby will get less oxygenation, and that's why kidneys will produce less urine, and that's why there will be oligohydramnios. Yeah, this condition is seen in 3rd trimester more than 2nd trimester, not in 1st trimester. Uteroplacental insufficiency is a property of later half of pregnancy. Okay, 3rd trimester more than 2nd trimester, not seen in 1st trimester. Yeah, yes. So uteroplacental insufficiency is the pathophysiology, but what is the cause of this uteroplacental insufficiency is idiopathic. So if you get a question, oligohydramnios, most common cause, and uteroplacental insufficiency is not written over there, you pick up idiopathic. Yeah, so idiopathic is most common cause of oligo. Uteroplacental insufficiency written over there, you pick up that. But then yes, if that is not given an option, then idiopathic is the answer. Okay, then this is one of the cause. Second cause would be congenital anomalies. Congenital anomalies can cause oligohydramnios. Which system's anomaly will cause oligo? Renal anomalies. Yeah, renal anomalies would cause oligohydramnios. Kidneys will not be able to produce urine, and that's why oligohydramnios. So let's say there is a baby with no kidney form. So bilateral renal agenesis. No kidneys are formed. No amniotic fluid will be formed. Since there will be no amniotic fluid, there will be no lung formation or lung hypoplasia will be there. Yeah, bilateral renal agenesis, no lung formation would be there because amniotic fluid is not there. There will be skeletal deformities. Yeah, there would be skeletal defects, lung deformity, lung hypoplasia, renal agenesis. This condition is called as Potter's syndrome. Zero survival, 0% survival. All the babies would die. Have a look at this. This is a picture of a baby with no kidneys at all. So Potter's syndrome, because of bilateral renal agenesis. You can see that there are skin folds, yeah, skeletal deformities, yeah, low set ears, low nasal bridge. There would be lung hypoplasia as well. Baby will die just after birth. Potter's syndrome. Yeah. Now this is one of the congenital anomalies. In fact, very important to understand that congenital anomalies would be most common cause of early onset oligohydramnios. Imagine a patient who has oligohydramnios right from first trimester. Fluid is already less in first trimester, and then oligo is there, less fluid than normal. Yeah, you should think about congenital anomalies. This is Potter's syndrome, one of the example of congenital anomalies. There is another condition called as Potter's sequence. Potter's sequence. It is same as above. Yeah, there will be no amniotic fluid, no lung formation, lung hypoplasia, skeletal defect, redundant skin, etc. Everything would be same, but kidneys are present. Yeah, kidneys are present. So kidneys are present. So how come amniotic fluid is not there? The cause is obstruction. The cause is obstruction. Yeah, give me 1 second. I said the cause is obstruction. Okay, Potter's sequence would be same as above, but kidneys are present. Causes obstruction. Example: posterior urethral valve. Posterior urethral valve. Have a look at this picture. This is a sonography where fetal urinary bladder is overly distended. Yeah, urinary bladder distension, and posterior urethra is also distended. This is because of posterior urethral wall. Very famous sign called keyhole sign. Keyhole sign is PU wall, posterior urethral wall. So amniotic fluid will not be formed because urine will not come out of the posterior urethral obstruction. Yeah. So yes, all the things would be same. Kidneys would be overly distended. Hydronephrosis would be there because obstruction has happened. Yeah. So lower urinary tract obstruction will cause this. Potter's sequence. Okay. So we have understood only two causes till now. One is idiopathic as most common cause. Uteroplacental insufficiency is idiopathic in most of the cases. And one would be congenital anomalies, which would be most common cause of early onset oligohydramnios. What are the other causes? Other causes of oligohydramnios. Other causes of oligohydramnios would be post-term pregnancy. Yeah, post-term pregnancy. Number 2, preeclampsia. Yeah, post-term pregnancy, preeclampsia. Then PPROM. You have understood about post-term pregnancy. Aging, placental calcification would be there in post-term pregnancy.
Preeclampsia, because there is uteroplacental insufficiency in preeclampsia as well. So there will be oligohydramnios. PROM, PPROM, there is leaking fluid per vagina. Yeah. Then IUGR, intrauterine growth restriction, with the same principle, uteroplacental insufficiency. Then IUFD, intrauterine fetal death. The baby has died. So since baby has died, urine output would be 0. Yeah. Then drugs like ACE inhibitors, captopril, enalapril, lisinopril. ACE inhibitors are contraindicated in pregnancy. They cause oligohydramnios, and in fact they can cause fetal congenital anomalies of renal system. Yeah, so ACE inhibitors are contraindicated. Even indomethacin can cause oligohydramnios because it reduces urine output by decreasing prostaglandins. Yes, indomethacin reduces prostaglandins, and fetal urine formation is prostaglandin dependent. So these are the drugs which can cause oligohydramnios. Number 7. If there is left-sided heart failure in mother, left-sided heart failure in mother, there will be less perfusion of placenta, and that would lead to oligohydramnios. Then renal hypertension in mother. Renal hypertension, again same reason, that vessels would be spastic, narrow, and that would lead to reduced flow to placenta and hence oligohydramnios. Then there is a condition called amnion nodosum. Imagine amniotic sac full of fibrotic nodes. So because of those fibrotic areas, the fluid transudation will get affected, and then there will be oligohydramnios. Yeah, have a look at this picture. This is a picture of amnion nodosum. So such nodular areas would be seen throughout the amniotic sac. Yeah, fibrotic areas. Amnion nodosum is the cause of oligohydramnios. Okay, so guys, we have covered the causes of oligohydramnios. You have understood right from idiopathic uteroplacental insufficiency to amnion nodosum are the causes of oligohydramnios. Now, question is, what should be done? Is it high risk pregnancy? Yes, oligohydramnios is indeed a high risk pregnancy. Yeah, it is high risk pregnancy for sure. It can cause complications to baby, and oligo itself is a mirror that something wrong might be happening in the mother. Yeah, so we have to rule out the cause. So detect the cause, rule out the causes. So detect the cause, and if there is preeclampsia, then treat the cause. Yeah, controllables should be controlled, and yes, Doppler USG is must to rule out uteroplacental insufficiency. I said Doppler will tell us whether the blood flow to the placenta is normal or not. If blood flow in placenta to placenta is abnormal, that is uteroplacental or fetoplacental insufficiency could be there in a case of oligohydramnios. Okay. Now, what should be the treatment of oligohydramnios? It is now proven that hydration therapy is useful. Yeah. Hydration therapy improves the placental circulation, and that would lead to improvement in amniotic fluid levels. Yes, that's true. There is no role of amnio infusion in antenatal care. So if there is oligohydramnios, you cannot just insert a needle and put amniotic. You cannot put normal saline to make amniotic fluid. Yeah, you can't. Yes, there is a procedure called amnio infusion, but then remember this thing, that it has been proved that it doesn't improve the outcome of the oligohydramniotic pregnancy. So why to intervene when advantage is not there? So there is no role of amnio infusion in ANC. Is amnio infusion useful? Yeah, amnio infusion helps in certain cases. Amnio infusion helps in case of cord compression leading to variable deceleration. We will talk about these things. So remember, amnio infusion is useful to treat cord compression leading to variable deceleration in labor. So if there are variable decelerations in labor, we definitely do amnio infusion. Amnio infusion is also used for meconium stained amniotic fluid to wash out the meconium. Yeah, but then amnio infusion is not the treatment of choice for oligohydramnios. It is proven that it doesn't help improve the outcome. Yeah, so no role of amnio infusion in ANC. No role of or no advantage of giving nitric oxide donors. Yeah, remember, outcome does not improve. So many people have tried many drugs actually, nitric oxide donors, and then they have also given, give me 1 second. Hello? Yeah, sorry for the disturbance. I said amnio infusion, that oligohydramnios, in oligohydramnios case there is no role of nitric oxide donors, NO donors. Arginix, arginitrix, these are the drugs which were given. Outcome doesn't improve, so we are not giving. Yeah, people have tried amino acid supplement, etc., but then outcome doesn't improve. Really, genuinely doesn't improve. Okay, so your role, my role as a doctor, is to do bi-weekly fetal monitoring. Bi-weekly fetal monitoring. It's a high risk pregnancy. Okay, so high risk pregnancy has to be dealt by bi-weekly fetal monitoring. So we have to do bi-weekly fetal monitoring. We will discuss this in fetal care. Chapter on fetal care is there. We will discuss that over there. And yes, we will have to do induction of labor at 36 weeks. Induction of labor at 36 weeks. This is what we should do for a case of oligohydramnios. Okay, before induction of labor, NST should be reactive. If baby is having distress, you don't do induction of labor. If there is fetal distress, you will have to do cesarean section. Yeah, fetal distress requires cesarean section, no doubt about it. But if NST is reactive, non-stress test, which we will cover in the fetal care chapter, if there is no fetal distress, NST reactive, yes, then you can do induction of labor. You can start the labor process. Then the baby will deliver out. Okay? Strict monitoring is required. Intrapartum monitoring is required. Otherwise, you might miss fetal distress during labor. Remember, fetal distress would require cesarean section. Okay? Am I clear? This is about oligohydramnios. Let me take one example. Yeah. Cases: 26-year-old primea gravida, 26-year-old primea gravida with 32 weeks of gestation. 26-year-old primea gravida with 32 weeks of gestation with AFI 3 centimeter, fetal size corresponds to period of gestation. Yeah. USG Doppler shows uteroplacental insufficiency. This is what is given to you. What should be the treatment? Yeah, what will you do? You will do hydration therapy in this case. Then you will do weekly Doppler. Then you will do non-stress test bi-weekly, 2 times in a week. Non-stress test bi-weekly. Then you will do induction of labor at 36 weeks. Induction of labor at 36 weeks. Yeah. In case of fetal distress, irrespective of period of gestation, you are supposed to do cesarean section. Immediate termination would be required, and that fetal distress requires cesarean section. Alright, hopefully you understood this, guys. So guys, what you understood about amniotic fluid is that we have to understand that this is a high risk pregnancy and you have to monitor bi-weekly. There is one interesting condition associated with oligohydramnios. I am writing important point, and that is amniotic band syndrome. It's a clinical scenario, amniotic band syndrome, where there is fibrotic band in amniotic sac due to oligohydramnios. Fibrotic band in amniotic sac due to oligohydramnios. Why does it occur? Because oligo would lead to reduced space in the amniotic sac, and then amniotic sac walls may meet each other and fibrosis may occur. Yeah. So that band can cause reduction in blood flow, can decrease blood flow to the limb of the baby. So it can coil around the limb of the baby, and then there may be amputation of limb. Limb amputation. Okay, that's possible. Limb amputation in utero. That's amniotic band syndrome. Okay, limb amputation in utero is amniotic band syndrome seen with oligohydramnios. Let's look at this baby. This poor chap lost one of the part of the limb because of amniotic band syndrome. That band can be around any limb, and sonographically we can see that amniotic band, yeah, stretching across the amniotic across the walls of amniotic sac, yeah, and that amniotic band can cause necrosis and amputation of the limb. Yeah. So if you get any picture of a baby without a part of the limb or a limb, then it could be amniotic band syndrome. Oligohydramnios is the culprit. Okay, got it? Very clear. That is all about a case of oligohydramnios. Let's talk about polyhydramnios now. Okay, polyhydramnios. Now polyhydramnios, also called as hydramnios, is defined as excessive amniotic fluid. Excessive means amniotic fluid volume more than 2 liters. Amniotic fluid index more than 24 centimeter. That would be 25, 26, 27. 25 or more is polyhydramnios. More than 24 is polyhydramnios. And single deepest pocket more than 8 centimeter. Single deepest pocket more than 8 centimeter. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So more than 24 can be written as more than or equal to 25 centimeter. Alright, guys. So AFI more than 24 is nothing but more than or equal to 25 centimeter. Okay. Then after you have written this, then there are grades of hydramnios. What are the grades of hydramnios? Mild, moderate, severe. Mild is when amniotic fluid index is less than 30 centimeter AFI. In other words, less than 10 centimeter single deepest pocket. Moderate would be less than 35 centimeter AFI. Less than 12 centimeter single deepest pocket. Severe would be more than or equal to 35 centimeter AFI. More than or equal to 12 centimeter single deepest pocket. Yeah. So yes, these are the grades of polyhydramnios: mild, moderate, severe. Needless to say, most common is mild polyhydramnios. Yeah, most common is mild polyhydramnios. Most common cause is idiopathic. Yeah, most common cause is idiopathic. Most common is mild and most common cause is idiopathic. We don't know the cause in more than 50% cases. Yeah, but beware, beware, beware. If they ask you most common cause of early onset, most common cause of early onset or severe polyhydramnios, most common cause of early onset or severe polyhydramnios, the answer would be congenital malformations. Yeah, congenital malformations. Let us talk about these malformations. So what are the congenital malformations causing polyhydramnios? There are many actually. Most common being GI abnormality. GI abnormality. Most common is GI abnormality. Then in GI abnormality, examples would be esophageal atresia, then duodenal atresia, then cleft lip, cleft palate, then congenital diaphragmatic hernia. See, when there is esophageal atresia or duodenal atresia, the drainage mechanism is blocked. Even with cleft palate, the drainage is hampered. So fluid will get accumulated in amniotic sac. Congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Let me show you one picture of diaphragmatic hernia. Yeah. So congenital diaphragmatic hernia, there will be abdominal content going into the thorax because of diaphragmatic hernia. So intestines are there, stomach would be there, so there is shifting on other side, shifting of heart on other side, lungs on other side, lung on other side. Yeah. There would be kinking of the esophagus and stomach, and that is why the swallowing, that is why the drainage of amniotic fluid will be stopped. That's why there will be polyhydramnios. Okay, so look at this picture. Huge amount of amniotic fluid is there. Yeah, there's huge amount of amniotic fluid. Polyhydramniotic bag sac is there. Okay, fluid everywhere. And stomach is small, microgastria. This is a picture where stomach is small. There is a scene in esophageal atresia. So I showed you I'm showing you esophageal atresia. I showed you diaphragmatic hernia. These things can cause polyhydramnios. Yeah. Then one more thing which can, there are many more things by the way, but GI abnormalities, these things can cause polyhydramnios. Then I am writing CNS abnormality like anencephaly. So neural tube defect, anencephaly, spina bifida. Then meningocele, meningomyelocele. Yeah, there will be anencephaly, spina bifida, meningomyelocele. All these things can cause polyhydramnios. Why anencephaly will cause polyhydramnios? Why neural tube defects will cause polyhydramnios? There will be open meninges. Because of open meninges, the fluid will transudate out into the amniotic sac. Meninges will give fluid to the amniotic sac. ADH would be less because pituitary is faulty. And since ADH is less, there will be more urination in anencephaly. Yeah. Then swallowing centers would be absent. That is why swallowing will also be hampered. Yeah. There may be another condition called encephalocele, where brain is there. In anencephaly, brain is not there. Skull bones are not there. Here, brain is there and herniating out of skull bones. That's an encephalocele. Look at this picture. Well, I will not use the word anencephaly over here because brain is there which is herniating out. So, encephalocele. Yeah, encephalocele can be a cause of polyhydramnios. Spina bifida can be a cause of polyhydramnios. See, there will be fluid going out. Yeah, fluid going out of this area, and then amniotic fluid will get accumulated. Okay, so yes, these are the causes of polyhydramnios. This is central nervous system abnormality. Third congenital abnormality which can cause would be CVS. CVS, any congestive cardiac failure can cause edema everywhere. Even placenta may be edematous, and that is why there will be more fluid. Yeah, Epstein's anomaly. Can cause this because Epstein's anomaly is high cardiac output failure. Yeah. Then omphalocele. Yeah. Omphalocele is abdominal wall defect. That can also lead to polyhydramnios. Then hydrops fetalis. Example, RH incompatibility. RH incompatibility. There will be antigen-antibody reaction, and whenever there is antigen-antibody reaction, there is exudation of fluid, and that can lead to polyhydramnios. Okay, so these are congenital anomalies. By the way, you have just covered two causes of polyhydramnios. One is idiopathic, which is most common cause, and one is congenital anomaly, which is most common cause of early onset polyhydramnios. What are the other causes of polyhydramnios? We have covered only two. Other causes would be multifetal pregnancy, Diabetes. Why multifetal pregnancy will have poly? More babies, more urine, polyhydramnios. Diabetes. Why diabetes will cause poly? Because there will be hyperglycemia in fetus. Would lead to more urination. And baby is larger than normal, so there will be more urination, and that's why polyhydramnios. Yeah, diabetic patients have polyhydramnios. Then placental tumors. Like chorangioma, hemangioma. Chorangioma, hemangioma. So any vascular tumor would lead to more transudation, and that would lead to polyhydramnios. Let me see if I have a picture or not. Yeah. By the way, which is this picture? This is a picture of a baby. Yeah, baby has abdominal content coming out, herniating out. Yeah, omphalocele, anterior abdominal wall defect. Polyhydramnios is there. Yeah. Then this is a tumor of placenta. It could be chorangioma or hemangioma. Histopath will tell us. Chorangioma, hemangioma. Histopath will tell us. We cannot identify. We can just identify that yes, there is a tumor. Even in sonography, we are able to see these things. Placenta is showing abnormality, and that would be seen. And yes, it could be chorangioma, hemangioma. Am I clear? Yeah, guys and girls. So we have understood the causes of polyhydramnios. Now, after causes of polyhydramnios, let us talk about what to do in a case of polyhydramnios. Let's say polyhydramnios patient has acute breathlessness. Polyhydramnios.
Yeah, so I was talking about management of a patient who has polyhydramnios with acute onset of breathlessness. Yes, breathlessness can happen because of pressure on the diaphragm, and that would lead to respiratory discomfort and respiratory distress. In such a scenario, you have to relieve the distress by doing something called as amniocentesis. This would be for therapy, so it is called therapeutic amniocentesis. Therapeutic amniocentesis is also called as amnioreduction. It's called amnioreduction. 1 to 2 liters of fluid per sitting. Yeah, 1 to 2 liters of fluid per sitting can be removed. Now, those patients who require therapeutic amniocentesis again and again, definitely there must be congenital anomaly like anencephaly or open neural tube defect, something like that. So sonography for anomalies scan, detailed anomaly scan should be done to rule out, to know the cause, to know the exact cause. It cannot be idiopathic. There has to be some cause. Yeah, and if it is there and it is incompatible with life, then you don't have to continue pregnancy. Then we can terminate pregnancy. Okay. Yeah. So yes, polyhydramnios plus acute breathlessness, you are supposed to do therapeutic amniocentesis. Then polyhydramnios plus preterm labor. Polyhydramnios, since there is over distension of uterus, there can be preterm labor. You are supposed to give tocolytics. Tocolytics are indicated up to 34 weeks. After 34 weeks, wait and watch. But up to 34 weeks, you are supposed to give tocolytics. Yeah. Drug of choice would be nifedipine. It's a calcium channel blocker. That's a drug of choice. Calcium causes contraction. Nifedipine will stop the contraction. Now, this tocolytic therapy will buy us time for giving steroids for lung maturity. Yeah, steroids are given to increase lung maturity. Drug of choice is, yes, injection dexamethasone. See, betamethasone is also there, but dexamethasone is preferred. At least in India, dexamethasone is the answer. 6 mg IM, 4 doses, 12 hours apart. That's what we give, dexamethasone. Injection beta, by the way, can be given, but dose is 12 mg, 2 doses, 24 hours apart. But best is dexamethasone. You give dexamethasone. Okay, so yes, tocolytic plus steroid therapy would be given for a patient who has polyhydramnios plus preterm labor. Yeah, then polyhydramnios for induction of labor. Suppose if you want to induce labor due to any reason whatsoever, this patient who has polyhydramnios, when she goes into labor and if membranes get ruptured, sudden gush of fluid can happen, and sudden gush of fluid can cause cord prolapse, can cause abruptio placenta, can cause malpresentations. So what do you do for induction of labor? Amniocentesis. It will remove the fluid. The bag which is full of water will decrease in size. Then what you are supposed to give is oxytocin to cause uterine contractions. Amniocentesis, then oxytocin to cause uterine contraction. This will fix the head. Yeah, the head will get fixed into the pelvis, and thank God, once the head gets fixed, we will get relieved. There will be less chance of cord prolapse now, because the ball will fit into the basin, and once ball fits into the basin, sudden gush of fluid cannot happen. Amniocentesis plus oxytocin followed by controlled ARM. Yeah, amniocentesis, oxytocin followed by controlled ARM. Now in labor chapter you must have heard that for augmentation of labor we first do ARM, then we wait for half an hour, and then if required then we give oxytocin. Here the story is slightly different. This is induction of labor for polyhydramnios, where we want the uterus to contract so that the ball head fixes into the basin, pelvis, and once the ball fixes into the basin, there will be less chance of cord prolapse. So amniocentesis, oxytocin, and then controlled ARM. This is for induction of labor in polyhydramnios. What if polyhydramnios patient is already in labor? She is already in labor. Then the only answer is controlled ARM. Artificial rupture of membranes should be done. That would be controlled ARM. What do you mean by controlled ARM? Fix the head from above. You have to fix the head from above and rupture the membranes with needle. Rupture the membranes with the needle. So some assistant would fix the head from above. Once the head is fixed, you can rupture the membranes with the help of needle, and gradually, slowly the fluid will come out. Yeah. Once the fluid comes out slowly, the head will get engaged, and then there will be less chance of cord prolapse. Yeah. So this is for polyhydramnios plus active labor. What about patient having polyhydramnios plus gross congenital anomaly? Polyhydramnios plus gross congenital anomaly, we do termination of pregnancy irrespective of gestational age. Yeah. Example, anencephaly. No survival at all. Anencephaly. Let's say example, anencephaly plus 26 weeks. What should I do? Wait and watch? No, I will do immediate termination. So somehow I will induce labor and then the baby will deliver out. This baby is incompatible with life. That's why I am doing termination of pregnancy immediately. I am not waiting. I will terminate pregnancy immediately. Few more facts about anencephaly. Anencephaly is associated with folic acid deficiency. It could be sporadic. Yeah. So baby has no skull bones, no brain. No skull bone, no brain formation. Okay. So because there are no skull bone, no brain, anencephaly will be associated with what? With what? With shoulder dystocia. Postterm pregnancy. The fetal signal which is necessary for labor will not come. So postterm pregnancy could be there. Yeah. Frog-like appearance. Frog-like appearance, there will be protruding eyeballs. Yeah. Mickey Mouse appearance, frog-like appearance. These are names given for anencephaly. Now, anencephaly can be diagnosed as early as 10 weeks in USG. So, it is the first anomaly detected in ultrasonography. As early as 10 weeks it can be diagnosed. Remember, female fetus more affected than male fetus. Anencephaly. Yeah. Earliest diagnosed in sonography by 10 weeks. Yeah, as early as 10 weeks. Then remember this question, investigation of choice for neural tube defect. Any neural tube defect for that matter is ultrasonography, USG. Yeah, investigation of choice for neural tube defect is ultrasonography, USG. Now question is there any role of medical management in polyhydramnios? Yes, there is. Suppose if there is diabetes, you control the diabetes by obviously medical management. But idiopathic polyhydramnios, can we do something to reduce amniotic fluid? Yes, there is a drug called indomethacin. Indomethacin tablet, 25 mg, 4 times a day for maximum 7 days. This can be tried, this can be given in a case of polyhydramnios. Yeah, especially idiopathic polyhydramnios. Okay, the urine output would reduce and hence there will be less amount of amniotic fluid. But beware, indomethacin can cause closure of ductus arteriosus. Can cause closure of ductus arteriosus, DA closure. That's why it is contraindicated at or beyond 32 weeks. Do not give indomethacin at or beyond 32 weeks. We can give it in early gestation. In early gestation, the ductus arteriosus is not so much dependent on prostaglandins for patency. But after 32 weeks, the ductus arteriosus would definitely require prostaglandins, and if you give indomethacin, then there is a chance of closure of ductus arteriosus. This is the concept behind indomethacin and ductus arteriosus closure. Prostaglandins are required for patency of ductus arteriosus. Okay, so yes, indeed, there is a role of medical management in polyhydramnios. Okay, so polyhydramnios is a condition which is seen in 1 to 2% pregnancies. 1% cases may have polyhydramnios. So you should know how to deal with a case of polyhydramnios. Most of the cases are mild. Yeah, mild patients do not require specific treatment. Yeah, idiopathic is the cause. Yeah, if they come with breathlessness, then amniocentesis. If they come with a preterm labor, then tocolysis and steroids. If they come in active labor, then you will have to do controlled ARM. Prevent cord prolapse by doing controlled ARM. Okay, got it? Very clear. This is all about the topic called as polyhydramnios. Hopefully you have understood these topics. Let us now talk about the topic called as fetal physiology. That's the topic now, fetal physiology. Let me introduce you to some terminologies. In this chapter, there are few terminologies which you have to remember. One is called zygote, one is called embryo, one is called fetus. Zygote, embryo, fetus. Zygote is from fertilization to 2 weeks. Then embryo is from 3rd week to 8th week. Fetus is from 9th week of fertilization till birth. Fetal life is from 9th week of fertilization till birth. My dear friends, all these figures are from fertilization, but from LMP, remember, LMP, then fertilization happens after 2 weeks in a patient who has 28-day cycle. So for counting from LMP, you just have to add 2 more weeks. So let's say 1st January is her LMP, was her LMP. 14th January she had ovulation and fertilization till 28th January. That means 2 weeks. This will be zygote. So zygote life is from fertilization to 2 weeks. In other words, 3rd and 4th week of from LMP. Yeah, 3rd and 4th week from LMP would be zygote life. What is zygote? Why are we using this terminology called zygote? Zygote means collection of cells. This terminology is zygote. Zygote means collection of cells. Morula is a zygote. Blastocyst is a zygote. Embryo means poles are formed. So once poles are formed in the plate, then it is called embryo. This is from 3rd week to 8th week of fertilization, which means 5th to 10th week from LMP. And we always count pregnancy from last menstrual period. Whenever weeks of gestation are given, it is always from last menstrual period. Okay? Then fetal life is from 11th week till birth. 11th week from what? From LMP, last menstrual period. Fetal life means, fetus means the baby now resembles human being. Earlier it was, morphology was not taken yet, but now it has taken a morphology. Now it resembles human being. This is the meaning of zygote, embryo and fetus. These are the terminologies used oftenly. Now, out of these three terminologies, which one do you think, which condition do you think, which stage do you think is most vulnerable for congenital malformations? Remember, the answer is embryo phase. So I am writing organogenesis occurs during embryogenesis. I said organogenesis occurs during embryogenesis. Most vulnerable for congenital malformation would be this phase called embryo phase. Why not zygote phase? Zygote phase, understand that if there is an insult, injury or damage in this zygotal life, there will be abortion. Yeah, organogenesis occurs over here. Congenital malformations would occur if there is insult in this phase. Okay, if there is injury in this phase, then there is a chance of congenital malformation. So we say that first trimester you should not give any medication which is harmful for the baby. Yeah, most vulnerable for congenital malformation would be embryo phase. Okay, yeah guys, after you have written this, let us talk about fetal growth and nutrition now. Fetal nutrition is the next thing. Then write down, fetus gets nutrition by hemochorial method. What do I mean by hemochorial method? Placenta. Placenta is hemochorial, which means mother's blood is in contact with chorion of the baby. So chorion, that's tertiary villi, if you remember, I told you, will derive the nutrition from the mother's blood. Hemochorial. Okay, O2, CO2, water will pass by simple diffusion. Simple diffusion is with the gradient, high concentration to low concentration. Mother will give oxygen because mother has more oxygen levels, baby has less oxygen levels. Baby will give carbon dioxide to mother because baby has more carbon dioxide. Yeah, and mother will take that carbon dioxide. O2, CO2, water, simple diffusion, this is with gradient. Then glucose by facilitated diffusion. So there are receptors called GLUT1 receptors. Glucose passes by facilitated diffusion. Then iron passes by active transport. So it is against the gradient. Against the gradient means even if mother's iron levels are less, baby will take its own iron. Baby is excellent parasite. It can take whatever it wants to take. Yeah. So baby takes iron even if mother has less iron. So severe iron deficiency in mother does not mean iron deficiency in baby. Baby can take iron by active transport against the gradient. Glucose transfer is by GLUT1 receptors, facilitated diffusion. It is also with the gradient, but then this is with the help of receptors, GLUT1 receptors. Okay. Insulin, heparin, IgM cannot cross placenta. Yeah, insulin, heparin, IgM cannot cross placenta. These are large molecules. Large molecules do not cross placenta. Can IgG cross placenta? So exocytosis, endocytosis is the method by which IgG can cross placenta. So it provides immunity to baby. What a wonderful concept that if mother has IgG, mother will give its IgG to baby. and once baby is born, baby will have protection to fight against the antigens which are dangerous, and mother has already developed antibodies to those antigens. Yeah, so IgG can definitely cross, IgM cannot cross. If you take neonatal IgM, that cannot be of mother, that can only be of baby. IgM cannot cross placenta. Okay, now I told you, if you remember, something called placental barrier. You remember? Placental barrier, tertiary villi. So placental barrier, which is made up of syncytial trophoblast, then cytotrophoblast, then extraembryonic mesoderm and fetal capillary endothelium. 4 things making placental barrier. Yeah, there are alpha zones and beta zones in placental barrier through which nutrition would take place. Alpha zones have thin syncytial trophoblast. Beta zones have thick syncytial trophoblast. Alpha, thin syncytial, beta.
So I was talking about thin syncytial trophoblast and thick syncytial trophoblast. You know, syncytial trophoblast is responsible for hormone synthesis. So alpha zones have thin syncytial trophoblast, and thin syncytial trophoblast would be responsible for nutrition. I mean to say, alpha zones would be responsible for nutrition of fetus. Beta zones, which have thick syncytial trophoblast, will be responsible for hormone synthesis. Yeah, beta zones would be responsible for hormone synthesis. Alright, after you have written about the nutrition and the growth, remember, growth of fetus depends on fetal insulin levels. Yeah, more the insulin, more will be the growth. That's why infants of diabetic mothers are macrosomics. They are large, they are huge, because mother's glucose, which is in excess, has crossed the placenta and has gone to the baby's body. Baby has produced its own insulin because insulin cannot cross. So insulin produced by baby will cause more growth of baby. So macrosomia would occur. Okay, so let's talk about weight of fetus at different weeks of gestation. 20 weeks, fetus would weigh roughly 300 gram. Then 22 weeks, 500 gram. 24 weeks, 600 gram. 28 weeks, 1 kilogram to 1.1 kg. We consider 1 kilogram as 28 weeks weight. 32 weeks, 1.8 kg. 37 weeks would be 2.5 to 3.5 kg. 37 weeks would be
2.5 to 3.5 kg. Yeah. Post-term pregnancy would have macrosomia. Yeah. Post-term pregnancy would have macrosomia. In India, we consider more than 4 kg as macrosomia. Okay. Male fetus more common than female fetus. I mean to say, male fetus will have macrosomia more commonly than female fetus. Yeah. Guys, so one thing we wrote as anencephaly more common in female fetuses. Macrosomia is more common in male fetuses. Okay, got it? Very clear. Now, if baby is born with birth weight of less than 2.5 kg, then baby is labeled as low birth weight, LBW. Yeah. Then VLBW is less than 1.5 kg, and then ELBW is less than 1 kg. Extremely low birth weight is less than 1 kg. VLBW, ELBW VLBW is less than 1.5 kg, ELBW less than 1 kg. These are the birth weights. Now then, gestational age. Gestational age, 1 second, थोड़ा वॉल्यूम कम करेंगे. या ठीक. Gestational age is divided into preterm, term and post-term. Preterm, term and post-term. Yeah, so gestational age is divided into preterm, term and post-term. Preterm is less than 37 weeks. Term is 37 to 42 weeks. Post-term is beyond 42 weeks. Okay. Preterm is subdivided into early preterm and late preterm. Early and late. Early preterm is less than 34 weeks. Late preterm is 34 to 36 plus 6. Term is early term, which is 37 to 38 plus 6. Term as 39 to 40 plus 6. This is the new definition of term, 39 weeks to 40 plus 6. And then there is something called late term nowadays. Late term is 41 to 42 weeks. Post term is beyond 42 weeks, also called post maturity. Post maturity. So early preterm, late preterm, early term, term, late term, post term.